Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today I'm going to do a tactics video. I haven't done one in a while. I had probably 1/5 of the audience that I have now back when I did my last one. So very briefly what I do is I talk about, in terms of comics, why and how the far left is attacking us as Comicsgate, but just as normal fans even, and how they use confusion and other sorts of tactics to attack us. And what I'm going to talk about today is specific pretty much to Marvel, but you can apply it to any of the far leftist comic companies. And again, just for my newer audience, when I say leftists, I don't mean liberals. Liberals and leftists are two massively different things. I'm not talking about your normal everyday liberal here. I'm talking about your leftists, and far leftists at that. Your SJWs, the people who run Marvel. So the thing is, Marvel, whenever you hear a public statement by Marvel in almost any venue, you will invariably hear two different phrases. One, Marvel represents the world outside your window. And number two, then they talk about representation of minorities and other marginalized people. Now, this is, I would say, first of all, not just a bastardization of Stan Lee's words and the words of the people who originally started Marvel, but it's quite simply equivocation is what it is. Equivocation is a logical fallacy. It's what they're trying to do is employ sophism. That is to say, they're trying to confuse the argument to make you believe something that isn't actually true. Because logic is based upon reason. Reason is based upon simple apprehension. Simple apprehension is, you know, the definition of a word according to reality. And you use that definition strictly in that strict way throughout all of your argument. Whereas equivocation is you take a word and you change its meaning halfway through the argument so you confuse the people who are listening, so you lead them down a garden path to believing something that isn't actually true. And this is what these people do, these far leftists do, especially for Marvel, when they use the word representation in these two different ways. I will just link a random video that I did a reaction to, because I'm sure I can link any one of them, and you'll hear it in the video if you want to go listen to it. Over and over again, they talk about Marvel represents the world outside your window, and then they talk about representation of this or that minority. Now, I want to take a step back really quickly and talk about why these far leftists do this. Well, it's because they're trying to redefine language. I would say that's the core of the culture war that's going on right now. They're trying to redefine language. Now, the far left for the longest time wanted to say that language is fluid and it doesn't actually have any meaning. Why? Well, they said that so they could destroy logic, because logic destroys all of their arguments. But now that they have destroyed the idea of logical argumentation in most people's minds, now they're moving on to, well, it actually does have a fixed meaning, and it's our politically generated meaning. And that's why they have things like political correct language. Right? And this is the center of the culture war and what's going on today with these far leftists. And if you don't believe that, just look at Canada, where right now they have compelled speech laws, where quite literally, if you do not use this far leftist speak in some situations, you risk having the police show up at your door and drag you away. Literally. I wish I was joking, but I'm not. It's all about language. They want to redefine everything according to their language. For them, everything is political. You've probably heard that from different people in Gamergate or Comicsgate that are against us. They say everything is political. I just watched this interview with this woman who was trying to convince everybody before the elections that everything is political. And she said, even her hair is political. You know, everything is political. So what they're doing is they're saying that you need to define everything according to their political agenda. And their political agenda, their ideology, their worldview is based upon power. It's all based upon power, which is another word they use a lot in these Marvel interviews. And power can be broken down into you're either an oppressor or an oppressed. And that's what it all breaks down to. So how do you define which one you are? Well, most people would say, well, if you're a straight white man, you're an oppressor, and if you're anything else, you're oppressed. But it's even more simple than that, because they will attack people who are minorities because they are supporting these kinds of ideas, these original or older ideas at the very least. And you can break it down into, quite simply, if you use language according to the way that they say you need to use language, according to their political ideology, where everything is defined according to their political ideology, then you're an oppressed class. But if you use language according to the old way of using language, logical way of using language, then you're an oppressor. That's pretty simply it. Depends on how you use language. And it's really fundamental because, again, I would like there to be a discussion between both sides here on Comicsgate and the anti-comicsgate side. But you can't have a real discussion unless first you can say, well, I'm actually mean what I say and say what I mean. We need to be rational and actually have a discussion or even an argument that's based upon something that isn't going to change halfway through your argument, right? You have to be logical. You have to be reasonable. You have to be rational. You have to actually have a discussion that goes somewhere. If you don't have those things, your discussion's not going to go anywhere. And these people on the left, far left, these leftists, they change the meaning of words halfway through. And this is what they're doing with Marvel represents the world outside your window. Now, this is an old phrase used by Stan Lee and a lot of old Marvel people. And they say, yes, it represents the world outside your window. What did they mean? Well, they meant represent as in the old way, the actual definition of represent. You know, it's if I remember correctly, it's a combination of two Latin words. Re, which is again, and representare, which is to present, right? So you present something again. So you present an image to the mind again. That's what you do when you represent something. You can also have a slightly political meaning in the fact that you have a representative, you know, in Congress or whatever it is, the Senate, whatever houses that you have in your political area, you know, you have a representative. And it does have a little bit of a political meaning there. But when they're saying that Marvel represents the world outside your window, all they're saying is it is a representation. These are images that we are presenting to your mind again, which look very much like the world outside. That's what they meant. And when these people who are from Marvel, like Son Amanat, who are talking about these things at the first, because they invariably say Marvel is the world outside your window, it represents the world outside your window, they use the definition of represent, that definition of represent there. But then they go on to say that you need to have now representation for these minorities. And when they use that word representation in this case, they're switching it around to mean their far leftist definition of representation, which you take that dynamic of power and oppressed and oppressor, and you put it at the core of how that word is defined. So they say that we need to have a representative, a representation for these minority classes. And basically, it's the word used a lot in identity politics, which is to say we need to present an image for these people, a representation for these people, so that they can rally around this idea, so that they can consolidate their power. Because, of course, they're oppressed. That's what they mean when they use the word representation in that latter way, in that latter phrase. They say we need to have representatives. And the trick is, again, they're trying to say Marvel represents the world outside your window. And you're saying to yourself in your mind, yeah, okay, I heard that before. Stan Lee said that. That makes sense. That's what Marvel is. And then they start talking about representation of minority characters. And they're trying to trick you into thinking that they're still using the same definition of representation. And you say to yourself, well, if Stan Lee said that, and that's what Marvel is based on, then I suppose representation is a good thing, isn't it? But that's the thing. They've switched the definition of representation. So it means far leftists speak representation according to power and the dynamic of oppressor and oppressed at that point. So they're trying to get you to support their far leftist speak when they use it in that latter sense. And of course, this isn't an honest discussion. They're not presenting their ideas in an honest way. And they also do this with power. They use the word power a lot in their interviews. Now, you could say, well, of course they use the word power a lot. We're talking about super-powered beings. They talk about superpowers, right? Again, no. They use that word power a lot of the time to talk about something other than superpowers. They'll start in with, yes, we're talking about power as in superpowers. They talk a lot about Kamala Khan and her powers, but they switch back and forth from one way of defining it to the other way of defining it many, many times during an interview. And most directly, what they talk about when they talk about, say, Kamala Khan and her powers is her political power, to be a representation, to consolidate power of the people in a political way. That's what they're talking about most of the time when they talk about powers. Now, you can tell this if you know what their, we'll say, ideological bent is, because this is a very specific academic way of speaking. It comes from something called emancipation politics, which is a form of cultural Marxism, basically. And this is what they do. They use their language in order to switch it over from one to the other. So I just like to do these videos because, you know, again, I want there to be a discussion. I would like there to be a discussion on both sides. I think that to some extent we have a discussion here. Certainly in my comments. We have people who disagree with me. Great. Let's have a discussion. But we can't have a discussion with the people on the other side who are trying to trick you every time they speak. And if they keep on switching out the meaning of the word every time they try and speak, then they're not having an honest discussion. And this is what they're talking about. I'll give you just, okay, so I suppose I should have said this at the first, but I'll give you an example, right? I'll just pull this up for myself here. One of Sanamonat's quotes from one of her videos, the one that I usually like to pull out. She says, "We have to make sure that these characters are obviously pushing really positive ideas, but also representative of the world around us. I think they always have been at Marvel, and Marvel has done a great job being an inclusive space and really representing the world outside our window, as we say, but I think this is really the next phase of that, about showcasing all different kinds of backgrounds and experiences and body types." Now you see, she talks about Marvel being a representation of the world outside your window. And then she goes on to saying, but the next phase of that is representation in this other form. And again, this is trying to confuse the subject. This is trying to redefine halfway through your argument. And no, we can't have a positive, fruitful discussion until we actually have a basis of speaking where everybody is being honest. Anyways, hopefully I've given you something new to think about. If I did, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a message. Tell me what you think about my argument here. Tell me whether you think I'm being rational or not. Alright, I'll see you later. Bye.